April 7th, 1972, 4:30 in the morning, 129 Mulberry Street, Little Italy, New York City. Joe Gallo was 43 years old that night. He was at Umberto's Clam House with his wife, his 10-year-old stepdaughter, his sister, and his bodyguard. He was eating, he was laughing, he was celebrating his birthday. 20 bullets tore through the restaurant in a matter of seconds. 3 of them found him, one in the back, one in the elbow, one in the buttock. He knocked over a table, pushed toward the door, and staggered into the street. He was trying to draw fire away from his family. He collapsed on the pavement. He was pronounced dead at 5:30 that morning at Beekman Downtown Hospital. The whole thing took less than 60 seconds. This was not just another Brooklyn wise guy getting what wise guys eventually get. This was Crazy Joe Gallo, the man who read Camus and Sartre in a prison cell while his crew ran extortion rackets across South Brooklyn. The man who walked into Bobby Kennedy's Senate hearing room in 1958, looked down at the government carpet and said, "Nice carpet. Good for a crap game." He was unpredictable, brilliant in a dangerous way, and for a long time he was the most wanted man in the New York underworld. And on the night of April 7th, the Colombo crime family finally caught up with him. This is the story of how that murder actually happened. Not the way Hollywood told it, not the way a dying old man with a book deal told it years later. The real story. Who ordered the hit? Who pulled the trigger? And why the movie The Irishman, which reached tens of millions of viewers on Netflix, got almost every single material fact completely provably wrong. Here is what most people who watch that film still do not know. The man director Martin Scorsese cast as the shooter was not in the building that night. He was not in the neighborhood. The eyewitnesses who were actually there, including Gallo's own wife, described a shooter who looked nothing like him. The real story is darker, more tangled, and far more revealing about how the American Mafia actually operates. You have to understand where Joey Gallo came from to understand why his death was inevitable. He was born on April 7th, 1929, in Red Hook, Brooklyn. His father Umberto had been a bootlegger during Prohibition. The family settled in the Kensington section of Brooklyn and ran a diner called Jackie's Charcolette at 108 Beverly Road. Cheap food, weak coffee. Joe dropped out of Brooklyn High School of Automotive Trades at 16. Shortly after, a car accident gave him a permanent nervous tic. A 1950 arrest sent him to Kings County Hospital Center, where doctors diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. The doctors filed paperwork. The streets issued a nickname, Crazy Joe. He was obsessed with a 1947 film called Kiss of Death. Richard Widmark played a sadistic hood named Tommy Udo, who pushed a woman in a wheelchair down a staircase. Joe watched it over and over. Started quoting lines. Started walking like the character. His early crew, which included Pete the Greek Diapoulos and Frank Iliano, thought it was an act at first. Then they realized it was not. His first real operation was jukebox extortion. Here is how it worked. The Gallo brothers, Joe, Larry, and Albert, would move into a neighborhood and approach every bar, every restaurant, every social club in the area. "You will buy a jukebox from us. You will buy it at our price. You do not want one? That is fine. We will explain in detail why you actually do want one." The explanation sometimes involved a knife held against a throat. The business scaled fast. Within a few years, the Gallo crew controlled jukebox and vending machine placements across large sections of Brooklyn, pulling in tens of thousands of dollars a year in pure extortion income. Every owner who bought a machine paid a tax. Every owner who refused paid a different kind of price. Then came the job that was supposed to change everything. In 1957, Joe Profesi, the boss of what would become the Colombo family, needed a problem solved. Albert Anastasia was the head of Murder Incorporated, the most feared killer in American organized crime. Profesi wanted him gone. He turned to the Gallos. The setup was simple and efficient. Anastasia had a standing barbershop appointment at the Park Sheraton Hotel at 56 West 56th Street in Manhattan. October 25th, 1957, Anastasia settled into the chair. Two masked gunmen walked in and shot him multiple times. He died with shaving cream on his face. The Gallo brothers, along with Carmine Persico and others, were widely believed to be the triggermen. Joe was not quiet about it afterward. He told people, "You can just call us the Barbershop Quartet." He expected a major reward from Profaci, a cut of Anastasia's rackets. Recognition, real money, not a few $1,000s and a handshake. Profaci gave him nothing. That is where this whole story really begins. In early 1961, Gallo executed one of the most audacious moves in the history of the New York mob. He and his crew kidnapped 4 of Profaci's most important men, Profaci's own brother, Frank. Underboss, Joseph Magliocco, senior figure, Salvatore Musacchia, and Capo Gian Simone. They were grabbed, held at secure locations, and used as leverage to force Profaci to renegotiate the Gallos' standing in the family. Profaci was on a flight to Florida before the day was out. He negotiated from a safe distance. He made promises. Then, the moment the hostages were released, he broke every single one of them. Profaci ordered the murders of Gallo associates. Carmine Persico personally attempted to strangle Larry Gallo to death at a restaurant in Brooklyn. Larry survived only because a patrolman happened to walk in. Others were not so lucky. The conflict that followed, known as the First Colombo War, left 9 men dead and 3 missing. Joe Gallo was arrested for extortion and conspiracy in late 1961 and sentenced to 7 to 14 years in prison. He went in a street tough. He came out as something the mob had never quite seen before. In prison, Gallo read Camus, Sartre. He took up painting. He built friendships with black inmates at a time when that was considered extraordinary for a white organized crime figure. Those connections mattered. When he got out, Gallo was thinking about running operations in neighborhoods the traditional mob had never been able to touch. He was released in April of 1971. The Colombo family sent a representative with a peace offering of $1,000. Gallo rejected it on the spot. He said he wanted $100,000 and a real seat at the table. They said no. That exchange ended any remaining possibility of peace. But here is where it gets interesting. Before Gallo could make his next move, the entire board changed. On June 28, 1971, Joseph Colombo stood at the podium of his own Italian-American Civil Rights League rally in Columbus Circle, Manhattan. A man named Jerome Johnson, pretending to be a press photographer with a camera, walked up close and shot Colombo 3 times. Colombo's own bodyguards shot and killed Johnson on the spot. Colombo survived but was paralyzed. He never recovered. He died in May of 1978. Johnson was black. The Colombo family made a calculation. Gallo had just come out of prison. He had built close relationships with black criminals on the inside. He had rejected their peace offering. He was hostile. Their conclusion was reached quickly and without nuance. Gallo had arranged the hit. The Second Colombo War was now a matter of when, not if. Every made man in the family understood that Gallo was under a death sentence. The police later concluded that Johnson had likely acted alone. It did not matter. In that world, perception outweighs truth every time. What followed was 10 months of tension, during which Gallo took almost no precautions for his safety. He was still moving around Manhattan openly. He had one bodyguard. He was going to nightclubs, to restaurants, celebrating his own birthday in Little Italy at 4 a.m. Remember the name Joseph Luparelli? He is the man who made the last night of Joey Gallo possible. April 6th, 1972. Gallo and his group spent the evening watching comedian Don Rickles perform at the Copacabana nightclub on East 60th Street in Manhattan. After the show, sometime after 4 a.m, the group walked into Umberto's Clam House at 129 Mulberry Street, Little Italy. Gallo was not watching his back. He was not checking who else was in the room. Joseph Luparelli was already in the room. He was a Colombo family associate, sitting at the clam bar. He looked up and saw Joe Gallo walk through the door. He dropped his spoon and walked out. He went 2 blocks to a nearby restaurant where Colombo men gathered. He found Philip Gambino, a Colombo soldier, and Carmine Sonny Pinto DiBiase. DiBiase was 49 years old, 5 feet 8. Stocky, receding dark hair. He had been on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list back in 1958. In 1959, he had been convicted of murder and sentenced to the electric chair. Had the conviction reversed on appeal because his confession was ruled inadmissible, been retried, and been acquitted. He was not a man who frightened easily. Gambino and DiBiase called acting family boss Joseph Iacovelli. The instruction was simple: arm yourselves and go. By 5:15 in the morning, they had guns. 5 men drove 2 cars down Mulberry Street, parked near Umberto's, and walked in through the back door. Luparelli stayed in the driver's seat of one of the cars. DiBiase entered the dining room and opened fire. About 20 bullets in roughly 30 seconds. 3 struck Gallo. He staggered to the street and collapsed. The shooters walked out, got into the cars, and drove directly to Iacovelli's Manhattan apartment to report in. Then they moved to a prearranged safe house in Nyack, New York, that had been rented months earlier in anticipation of exactly this moment. The cover did not hold for long. Luparelli started to believe his own partners were planning to eliminate him. He said he became violently ill after a meal at the Nyack safe house and suspected he had been poisoned. He left on a pretext, drove to Kennedy International Airport, and flew to California. Then he walked into an FBI field office and gave them everything. The FBI called New York Police Chief of Detectives Albert Seidman on a long-distance call. Seidman flew Luparelli back to New York. On May 3, 1972, the New York Times ran the full account on the front page. On December 13, 1972, a Manhattan grand jury officially identified DiBiase as the killer of Joe Gallo and indicted 4 men in connection with the murder. That is the documented, investigated, witness corroborated, grand jury confirmed record of what happened. Now, about the Irishman. 3 weeks before he died in December of 2003, Frank Sheeran gave a confession to writer Charles Brandt. Sheeran claimed he was the man who walked into Umberto's clam house alone and shot Joe Gallo. His motive, he said, had nothing to do with the Colombo family war. Earlier that evening at the Copacabana, Gallo had been rude and disrespectful toward Sheeran's boss, Russell Bufalino. Bufalino gave Sheeran a nod. Sheeran tracked Gallo to Umberto's and did it himself with a .32 caliber pistol. Brandt published the account in 2004. Martin Scorsese turned it into a major film in 2019, seen by tens of millions of people. Here is the problem. Frank Sheeran stood 6 feet 4 inches tall. Gallo's widow, Sina, was sitting at the table that night. She survived. She was interviewed. She described multiple shooters. She described them as short. She described them as Italian. The New York Daily News published a physical description of the gunman in the immediate aftermath. About 5'8", stocky, about 40 years old, receding dark hair. That is DiBiase, not Sheeran. Pete the Greek Diapoulos, Gallo's own bodyguard, was shot once in the restaurant that night. He survived. He identified DiBiase as the shooter. He knew DiBiase personally. He was certain. Nicholas Gage, who covered the mob for the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal for years and who personally interviewed Luparelli, reviewed the claims in Brandt's book and called it, quote, the most fabricated mafia tale since the fake autobiography of Lucky Luciano. Frank Story, a former FBI assistant special agent in charge of the organized crime program in New York City, said plainly, that is just crazy. He did not do it. He never would have gone to New York to do that. Sheeran knew exactly what he was doing. The real shooters were dead or bound by omerta. No one was going to step forward and correct the record. He had lived a genuine criminal life, but it was not glamorous enough for the story he wanted to tell. So he claimed credit for the most famous unsolved mob hit in New York history and built a legend around a lie. He got his book, he got his movie, he got Robert De Niro to play him. The truth was less cinematic. After Gallo's death, his sister stood over his coffin and said the streets would run red with blood. She was not wrong. At least 10 more men were killed in the months that followed. A Gallo hitman was sent to the Neapolitan noodle restaurant in Manhattan to take out Colombo leadership and accidentally shot 4 innocent diners instead. State police raided a farm in Saugerties, New York, connected to the Persico faction of the Colombos, and found rifles, shotguns, and 40 bombs. The violence did not end until 1974, when the surviving Gallo crew was absorbed into the Genovese family. The war ended not in victory, but in a quiet merger. Bob Dylan, who had befriended Gallo during his final months and wrote the song Joey about him, said, "I never considered him a gangster. I always considered him some kind of hero, an underdog fighting against the elements." That is one way to see it. Here is another. Joe Gallo spent his entire adult life trying to rewrite the rules of an institution that does not allow rewriting. He challenged his boss, went to war, went to prison, reinvented himself, came home, and still could not read the room clearly enough to understand that a man with an open death contract does not eat his birthday dinner without a plan. 4 men walked through the back door of a restaurant in Little Italy and killed him because their boss said it was not personal. It was not the result of a nightclub slight. It was a contract that had been written 9 months earlier, on the day Jerome Johnson shot Joseph Colombo at Columbus Circle. Crazy Joe Gallo just took a long time to collect on it. And one dying man in Pennsylvania decided to take credit for all of it. If this story reshaped what you thought you knew about the Irishman, hit subscribe. We drop a new mob documentary every single week. Drop a comment below. Do you think Frank Sheeran believed his own lies by the end? Or did he know exactly what he was doing?